Let's look at the condition of desperate families in developing countries in the status quo. Children of such families have been chained by their obligation to financially provide to the survival of their families. They have been shackled when forced into illegal child labor and other antisocial activities. They have been caged by the exploitative nature of such child labours, and that's what we condemn today. On an average, 20% of the child population in developing countries are forced into child labour. Therefore, we see child labour is weaved back into the roots of developing countries, driven by desperation and lack of education, and therefore is not easy to remove. However, what we can remove is the exploitative nature of child labour, which has been spoiling lives of 100 million children, and that's what we propose. Moving on to the definitions, three terms needs to be defined. A. Legalizing. It is to make something legal. Second, child labor. The act when children are forced or willingly go into labor as laborers. Third, developing countries. Countries which have an HDI index lower than the industrial countries or industrially developed countries. So what is our stance today? We see that the child labor in such developing countries is weaved back into its roots and therefore is very tough to remove. However, what we could remove is the exploitative nature of the child labor. Second, we stand for the right of education and development of these children, however not undermining the ability to survive of their families. So moving on to the model. So we adapt a model somewhat similar to the Bolivian model which has been established. So we allow the children from the age of 10 to 14 to work as child laborers only if they satisfy some conditions. That is, A. They need to be registered under a school and need to have a minimum attendance of 80%. B. They need to have the consent of their guardians. And C. They should not work in any hazardous jobs such as mining, quarrying, etc. So this will be monitored by the existing enforcing bodies which has been trying to remove the child labor. And second, this will only be established in countries where child labor is prevalent. So what am I going to talk about? Two things. A. How the rights are being violated of children and the families. And second, how this will break the cycle of poverty. So we need to understand what type of people will this motion affect. We see that the motion will affect only those people who are desperate and not economically stable and therefore force their children into child labor or criminal activities. So how exactly is the rights of these children being affected? Two rights are being affected. A. Right to education and second, right to protection against exploitation. How exactly? We see that when these families are desperate and need each and every member of their family to support for the economic stability of their family, they force their children often into child labor. However, due to this illegalness of child labor, prosecution is the consequence of child labor. Therefore, they force their children into informal sectors which are often exploitative in the sense they give long working hours for these children and give very low wages. So we see the direct right to protection against exploitation of these children have been harmed and these children have been exploited to their fullest. And second of all, we see that as they have been exploited, they do not have any time for education or any scope of education and therefore the right to education has also been exploited. Second of all, we see that in such a situation where these families do comply to these legal laws and the child labor is removed from the society, we see that the right to survival or the ability to survive of these families has been affected. Therefore, what does this lead to? We see that further exploitation of the children and further rights of the children are going to be harmed in such a situation. As we have seen that economic desperation has always led to exploitation of the minors, and that's what we propose on proposition. And that's why we stand strong with the idea of legalizing child labor. So how exactly will legalizing child labor solve these issues? First, we see that the right of education of these children will be upheld as we see in the model. The basic criteria of becoming a legal child labor is education. Therefore, this cycle of desperation and poverty could be broken through the tool of education. Second of all, the right to protection against exploitation can also be removed can also be upheld because two reasons. A. We see that when these formal sectors open their doors to these child laborers, when it becomes legal, this will lead to the protection of them from exploitation. How exactly? Two main things. A. We see these formal sectors do have basic labor laws and therefore need to comply with them and therefore provide fixed wages and wages according to the number of working hours of their children, and therefore the exploitation of these children will not occur. Second of all, these children will not be forced to resort to such criminal activities where they are forced into begging or when they are forced into theft. And therefore we see that these children will be protected from such situations, and therefore we will also protect our future generation. So if we do not want 100 million children falling into this trap of exploitation which has been happening in these informal sectors in developing countries, if you condemn when thousands of children who are desperate are forced into pornography and various other anti-social activities in villages of Bangladesh, and third of all, if you actually want a better future generation where no child is dragged into anti-social activities due to his or her desperation, you should propose. Thank you.